The morning of the 17th of March, 2014, began like any other in Chelsea. Manhattan light breaking against steel fire escapes, the hum of delivery vans climbing through the avenues. But inside apartment 4E of 200 11th Avenue, there was no motion, no coffee brewing, no shoes brushing against polished floorboards, just a silence that thickened as the minutes passed. The housekeeper arrived just after 10 a.m., her footsteps echoing down the quiet hallway. She knocked once, then again. No answer. The door was locked from the inside. Behind that door, Loren Scott, model, designer, partner to Mick Jagger, was already gone. Hanging by a black satin scarf tied to a doorknob in her walk-in wardrobe. No sign of struggle, no forced entry. Just the static of an unanswered phone and the soft scrape of reality breaking. It was an ending so quiet, so deliberate, it felt choreographed. Her iPhone continued to buzz. Calls from her assistant, then from a friend, one from London. The devices kept ringing into the void, vibrating against a silence that had settled hours before anyone noticed. Outside, spring was slowly thawing the city. Inside, time had stopped. There was no blood, no disarray. Only the note on her desk, a handwritten message that would never be made public. And the way the air in the room seemed almost folded, like the lining of one of her gowns. The wardrobe she had built for stars now held her last breath. New York police arrived shortly after the housekeeper's discovery. Paramedics pronounced her dead at the scene. No foul play, no drugs, just the loop of a scarf. And questions no one could answer. Why the scarf? Why the wardrobe? Why that day? In the days that followed, reports would focus on her fame, her beauty, her proximity to rock royalty. But inside that apartment, she had died alone. No entourage, no flashbulbs, no music. Only the sound of fabric under tension, and a final, private silence. She had left behind a life many envied: red carpet photos, luxury clients, the Rolling Stones, but also over $6 million in debt, and a company she was quietly dissolving. The woman the world thought had everything was unraveling behind closed doors, and she chose to leave quietly, in the same way she often entered a room, elegant, unnoticed at first, then unforgettable. That locked door was more than just a scene. It was a symbol of control, of finality, of shutting the world out when it no longer fit. Some who knew her whispered about exhaustion, others about depression. But grief doesn't need a spotlight, and pain doesn't follow a script. Sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones where nothing shatters, just stops, like a dress slipping from a hanger. And in that room still, cold, perfumed faintly with Chanel and cedar, Loren became a question suspended in the quiet. A woman so known for dressing others, leaving behind a silence no one could tailor. She was impossible to miss in a crowd. At 6'3" without heels, Loren Scott rose like a figure carved out of onyx and ivory, slender, composed, immaculately dressed. Yet, somehow, she often disappeared behind the silhouettes of others. To the fashion world, she was the discreet couturier, the woman who made Nicole Kidman glow in sequined restraint, who molded Penelope Cruz in midnight velvet, who could rework royalty out of silk and sequins with the stealth of a master thief. Her label never shouted, it whispered. Her personal life, even more so. But in every room, no matter how brightly she shimmered, there loomed a larger shadow. Mick Jagger. For 13 years, their lives intertwined, jetting between London, Paris, New York. Paparazzi caught glimpses, her arm around his waist, his hand on her shoulder, but she rarely spoke to the press. When she did, she redirected the light, always onto him, or her work, never herself. To be Loren was to live in an almost ritual invisibility. Despite their years together, there was no shared home. Her Chelsea apartment was hers alone. Jagger, constantly on tour, was more ghost than partner. They attended premieres together, yes, but always as two presences with separate orbits, never quite merging into one. Insiders speculated about the dynamic. Muse, they called her. Others, more cynically, decoration. She, the impossibly poised beauty with the elegant hands. He, the aging rock legend recast in his seventh life. Together, they were glamour and grit. But what does glamour give you when the lights go out? Friends described her as deeply private, perhaps to a fault, even in moments of triumph when her collections debuted in Paris, or when first ladies wore her designs, she retreated. She'd rather stay home than bask in applause. But inside, something was buckling. Though she was adored by her clients, praised by Vogue, she remained an outsider in the high echelons of fashion power. Her brand, financed quietly by Jagger in the early years, was never picked up by conglomerates. She refused to dilute her vision with mass-market compromise. That meant autonomy, yes, but also isolation. And then there was the height. She had once said, jokingly, that as a teen she wished she could cut off her legs to be like the other girls. Even as a model in Paris, towering among waifs, she seemed not to fit. The fashion industry prized uniqueness, but only if it could be commodified. Lorraine was never quite that. She was too elegant, too enigmatic, too unsellable. She dressed the famous, but she was not one of them. At events, cameras found her after they found him. In articles, she was Mick Jagger's girlfriend before designer. And no matter how much velvet she sculpted, how many column dresses she cut to perfect proportion, she could not tailor the world to see her first. A friend once remarked that she seemed happiest working alone, pinning muslin to mannequins in silence. It was control she craved, precision, a world with straight seams and no surprises. But life is rarely that kind. In the shadows she inhabited, fame offered no shelter. Love, no clarity. And even towering over the room, she felt somehow dwarfed by reputation, by press, by the man whose orbit eclipsed her own. She had made herself into a myth of elegance. Yet behind the mirror she avoided was someone smaller, someone tired, a woman who made other women feel beautiful, while quietly, invisibly, fading from view. Before the silk, the stilettos, and the front rows of Paris, there was a girl named Luann in Roy, Utah, a place where the horizons stretched flat and the expectations of womanhood were tightly stitched. Adopted at birth by a devout Mormon couple, Luann Bambro was brought into a world of discipline, modesty, and quiet order. Her adoptive father, a strict man who worked as a school teacher, kept the house in near military precision. Her mother, devoted but emotionally distant, taught obedience through silence. Love was shown in chores completed and rules followed. And from the very beginning, Luann did not fit. By age 12, she was already taller than most adult men in town. Lanky, awkward, trying to compress herself into chairs that didn't suit her legs, or Sunday dresses that fit nowhere. The mirror became her adversary, a strange window reflecting a body she didn't understand and could not reshape. She learned quickly not to look too long. In the culture she was raised in, beauty was to be modest, womanhood obedient, ambition whispered if it existed at all. But Luann was all sharp angles and uncontainable height. There was no script for a girl like her in Utah's still, conservative quiet. So she left. By 17, she had legally changed her name to Lorraine Scott, a name as long and sleek as the gown she would one day design. She left the plains behind for Paris, signing with elite models, and was suddenly walking the runways of Chanel and Thierry Mugler. It was a transformation as radical as it was precise, from unwanted anomaly to icon of elegance. But reinvention is never complete. The mirror traveled with her. In photo shoots, she was the picture of composure, sculpted and still. But backstage, she often asked for the lights to be dimmed. Too harsh, she would say. Her beauty was obvious to others, but to Lorraine, it was something conditional requiring architecture, structure, permission. Friends noted how rarely she was photographed off-duty. She had no interest in the paparazzi. She didn't chase attention. She dressed those who already had it. Her genius was in subtraction and knowing when to step back from the image, not crowd it. Still, the anxiety remained. There were whispers from photographers that she would re-edit images of herself obsessively, agonizing over shoulder lines, shadows under the eyes, the fall of hair. A lifelong discomfort with her body clung to her like static, eased only when she was draping fabric on someone else. Even her designs carried that internal struggle. Her gowns lengthened, narrowed, refined. She knew how to disguise hips, elongate torsos, trick the eye into elegance. Because she herself had studied how to be seen, and more importantly, how to avoid it. Some nights in her studio, she worked into the early morning hours alone. Mannequins lined the walls like quiet sentinels, dressed in half-formed dresses, music low, coffee cooling beside pins and patterns. The air smelled faintly of steam and lavender starch. Her reflection lived only in glimpses window panes, the gleam of metal, never the mirror. Once, when asked in an interview what beauty meant to her, she paused. "It's control," she said softly. "Knowing how to present what you want others to see." But what about when the lights go off? When there's no one to dress, no camera to direct? The girl from Utah never quite disappeared. She lived in the silence between fittings, in the pause before a curtain rose, in the breathless moment before a zipper was fastened. A woman who fled her past, reshaped her name, conquered couture, yet never found peace in her own skin. And still, somewhere in the background, that mirror remained, unforgiving, still, waiting. They shimmered under flashbulbs, her dresses, tight-lipped marvels in satin and organza, cinched at the waist, flowing like liquid over the bodies of women who defined the zeitgeist. Nicole Kidman at Cannes, Amy Adams at the Oscars, Madonna, Sarah Jessica Parker, Michelle Obama. Each gown was a signature without a name, because even when her work stole the room, Loren stayed behind the curtain. Her studio was her sanctuary. On the second floor of a narrow Manhattan building, the space was both cathedral and laboratory. Mood boards scattered with vintage fabric swatches, handwritten notes. A porcelain bust covered in pins and chalk lines. It smelled of pressed linen, hot iron, and a faint trace of vanilla. Everything immaculate, but never sterile. Here, Loren orchestrated her magic, but there was an ache woven into the seams. By 2010, her brand was lauded but not yet profitable. Despite the red carpet success and loyal clientele, she struggled to expand. She had refused outside investors. She wanted control, always control, and control costs money. Fashion, for all its glamour, is brutally unforgiving in business. A season missed, a shipment delayed, a review soured, each could be a nail in the coffin. She masked it well. Publicly, Loren was poised, elegant, successful. Privately, she was juggling deadlines, debts, and doubts. The fall 2013 collection was canceled just days before launch. Officially, production delays. Unofficially, she didn't have the money. Her staff was heartbroken. Orders were behind. Retailers pulled out. The walls were closing in. Quietly. Still, she continued to dress others, to pour her energy into silhouettes for women who had the power she never quite held. Her hands, always working, always folding, always smoothing. Her own life, by contrast, became increasingly wrinkled creases she couldn't press out. She had invested everything financially, emotionally in her label. It wasn't just a brand. It was her body, her voice, her reinvention. And now, it was slipping through her fingers. Friends began to notice subtle changes. She looked thinner, tired, once luminous eyes now dull around the edges. Yet when asked, she brushed it off. Just tired, she'd say. Busy season. She was still receiving invitations, still featured in glossies. But the spotlight didn't illuminate her, it burned. And it cast longer shadows. Even her relationship with Jagger, publicly solid, privately fraying, was no refuge. She rarely accompanied him on tour in those final years. When she did, she appeared more like a guest than a partner. Photos showed her at the edge of the frame, smiling but unsmiling, always dressed to perfection. But perfection is often a costume. The press began to speculate. Was she out of the fashion game? Had she faded? Did her failure to show mean she was done? She said nothing. Her silence was armor, but armor can become heavy. One evening in late 2013, she attended a private gala alone. Dressed in her own design, sleek black crepe, high collar, sleeves that framed her wrists like calligraphy. She smiled for the cameras, posed against a branded backdrop. But her eyes betrayed her. They looked past the lens, not into it. A stylist who knew her whispered afterward. She was there, but not present, like fabric draped on a mannequin, beautiful but hollow. Behind every dazzling gown was a woman folding in on herself. The silk, the sequins, the sculpted necklines, they weren't just design choices. They were shields, masks, an attempt to wrap herself in something stronger than skin. But even black silk phrase, and Lorraine, the girl who had transformed herself thread by thread, was running out of material. The world imagined them as opposites, destined to fit she, statuesque and refined. He, mercurial and wild. But the longer their relationship stretched, 13 years in total, the more that fantasy thinned, like worn velvet. Mick Jagger, legendary frontman of the Rolling Stones, was never meant for stillness. His life moved on stages, in jet trails, behind tinted glass and velvet ropes. Lorraine, by contrast, moved in silence. Her realm was the quiet fold of a hem, the careful curve of a neckline. Their worlds overlapped, but rarely synchronized. They were rarely in one place long. He was always touring, rehearsing, recording. She was designing, fitting, launching. They lived in different cities. She had her Chelsea apartment. He, homes scattered across continents. There was no shared key, no ring, no child, no contract, only the length of years and the thin thread of intimacy stretched across distance. Still, she waited. When he was away, she filled her time with work. When he returned, she folded herself into his orbit red carpets, backstage passes, curated dinners. She was always perfectly dressed, poised, smiling. Yet in private, friends said she rarely spoke of him. When she did, it was with restraint, as if even her words about Mick had to be tailored. He was supportive in the beginning. He helped fund her first fashion shows, Saturday front row when he could. She called him her dear companion. But over time, the spotlight he brought began to feel less like illumination and more like eclipse. In her final months, the silences between them grew louder. She was struggling with her business, but she never told him how deep the debt had gone. Pride kept her silent, or perhaps fear that even this partnership, tenuous as it was, might dissolve under financial burden. Reports would later claim that they had argued, that he had distanced himself, that she feared he was seeing someone else, that she had felt the slow dread of abandonment beginning to crystallize. But none of this was public, and that was precisely the problem. In the vacuum of truth, speculation breeds. After her death, Jagger would issue a statement. "I am still struggling to understand how my lover and best friend could end her life in this tragic way." He canceled one concert, then resumed the tour days later. Grief, he said, needed rhythm. Music was healing, but to those who had watched her fade, it felt like something colder, a kind of vanishing act. Like her absence was too inconvenient to linger over. At her memorial in Los Angeles, He read a poem. His daughters attended. He wore a dark suit. The cameras clicked, but many couldn't forget how soon he was back on stage. Arms wide, sweat-soaked, the lights turning him golden once more. For Loren, silence had been survival. But in death, it became a kind of indictment. Was she ever heard? Or only seen? Their relationship, for all its apparent devotion, had no safety net, no shared space where she could collapse. And when the weight became too much, she fell into a space no one else seemed to notice until it was far too late. In interviews, she had once said, "I'm not someone who shouts. I believe in elegance." But perhaps she should have shouted. There is a peculiar kind of loneliness that comes from being next to someone everyone knows, while no one knows you. It wears away at the self, thread by invisible thread, and even the most beautiful seams, when pulled long enough, will tear. There's a type of exhaustion that masquerades as elegance. Loren Scott wore it well. To the outside world, she remained the picture of sophistication, her dark hair coiled neatly, lips painted in a muted red, dresses hugging her silhouette like a whisper. But by late 2013, something inside her had begun to unravel, and the mask, always seamless, started to slip. The signs were faint at first. Canceled appearances, a skipped dinner here, a rescheduled fitting there. Staff quietly let go. A few clients puzzled by delayed deliveries. She smiled through it all, still gave interviews, still appeared at events. But her answers became rehearsed, detached, as if she were playing the part of Loren Scott rather than living it. Beneath the shimmering surface, debt piled up like dust in a showroom no one dared sweep. Her fashion label, though celebrated, had become an albatross. Reports would later reveal it owed over $6 million. But she never let on. She told friends things were under control, that she had new plans, a fragrance line, a collaboration with Banana Republic. There was always a next thing. But the truth was simpler and sadder. She was sinking. Emails sent to suppliers grew more apologetic. Her staff, though loyal, grew anxious. There were whispers, unpaid invoices, unpaid rent, mounting pressure from creditors. And still, Loren said nothing publicly. No press release, no admission of failure, just silence and a thin smile that grew harder to hold. In January 2014, her show at London Fashion Week was abruptly canceled. She claimed production issues, timing conflicts. But the reality was, she couldn't afford to produce the collection. Not properly, not at her standards. She apologized profusely to those involved, sent handwritten notes, promised to regroup. But something had cracked beneath the surface, and it wasn't just financial. Friends noticed she seemed faded, like the color had drained from her. Her appetite waned. Her voice grew quieter. She stopped answering some texts. Even her social media, once carefully curated with images of her studio, her travels, her inspirations, fell silent. And then there were the shoes. She had always been precise about her footwear, custom heels that balanced her height, made her walk seem more glide than step. In the final months, she began wearing flats, simple black ones, scuffed at the toes, as if the effort to rise above had become too much. She still worked, she still dreamed, but the dreams grew small, and the world around her louder. A former assistant would later recall a late-night moment in the studio. Loren sitting on the floor, barefoot, surrounded by fabric swatches, not crying, just quiet. "It's all slipping," she said softly, more to herself than anyone. "And I can't stop it." But she would never say so publicly. Her brand was discretion, dignity, silence. To admit defeat was to unravel entirely. So she stitched herself tighter. The final weeks were a blur of avoidance. A missed flight, a postponed dinner. Jagger was away in Australia. She was alone in New York, in that beautiful apartment filled with sharp lines and soft shadows. The wardrobe her temple was ordered, color-coded, pristine, and into that silence, she walked. To the outside world, she was still Loren, the mysterious designer, the muse, the girlfriend of a legend. But those closest to her began to feel the absence before it was real, as if she had already begun stepping away, retreating into the seams. The public didn't know yet. They wouldn't see the cracks until they shattered. But the ones who loved her, truly loved her, could feel the weight behind her eyes. And by the time they reached out, she had already folded herself into silence. It was still dark when she woke, the kind of darkness that rests in corners, unwilling to lift, even as morning approaches. Outside, Manhattan was quiet, muted beneath layers of snowmelt and exhaust. Inside, the air was unnaturally still. Loren moved quietly through her apartment, her footsteps almost soundless on the wooden floor. The windows faced the Hudson, but the blinds were drawn. Nothing peered in, nothing looked out. She was wearing black. No one will ever know the exact sequence of that morning, what she thought, what she touched, how long she hesitated. But there are things we do know, things that sit, frozen, in the official report. She selected a black satin scarf from her collection. Not silk satin, heavy, with just enough strength. She walked into her walk-in wardrobe, the place she spent countless hours fitting gowns, dressing mannequins, measuring hope. It was immaculate, lined with garments, each a quiet triumph. She chose a doorknob low to the floor. No signs of violence, no evidence of struggle, just the scarf, looped, tied. Her final act performed in silence, surrounded by the very dresses that had once given her a voice. And she left a note. The police would never release its contents, not to the public, not to the press. But sources close to the investigation confirmed that it was brief, personal, directed at no one and everyone. Some claimed it included the words, "I'm sorry." Others said it mentioned her business. But the truth lies locked inside a drawer at NYPD headquarters, as private as she always was. There was no chaos, no pills, no blood, just order, a tragic symmetry, a designer's death. The black scarf became a motif the press could not resist. It was elegant, poetic, horrifying. A woman who once dressed the powerful in layers of mystique had, in her final moment, turned that fabric inward. Hours passed before anyone knew. Her assistant texted, no reply. The housekeeper arrived, knocked, waited. The door was locked from the inside. She called the doorman. He called 911. When they found her, she was still warm. It was the way she had composed herself that lingered in memory. No sign of panic, no violence, only quiet. As if she had designed her own exit with the same care she once gave to a neckline. For days afterward, her apartment remained untouched. Boxes of unsold garments in the hallway. A studio half-packed, one open notebook near the sewing machine, with a scribbled phrase across the page. Stillness holds its own beauty. The press, insatiable, began circling like moths to the glow of tragedy. Jagger's girlfriend dead. Fashion designer in crisis. Glamour masks despair. Each headline flattened her into a symbol, but inside that closet, she had not been a headline. She had been a woman, barefoot, alone, done. There is something haunting about a wardrobe. It holds memory in silk, pain in perfume. Even now, friends say they can still smell her scent in the lining of old dresses. Chanel, tuberose, a touch of lavender, as if she never fully left. She had designed for power, but power had never protected her. In the days after her death, questions multiplied. Why didn't anyone see? Did she ask for help? Did she want to be saved? But these questions came too late. bouncing off walls where no one answered. And there, among her creations, she faded not in chaos, but in silence, like fabric returning to thread. The crowd in Perth roared as the Stones took the stage. It was just days after Loren's death. A sea of fans, lights, and thunderous applause. Mick Jagger stood beneath the floodlights, slimmer than usual, older than most, and momentarily motionless. The music swelled. The band launched into their set, and grief blurred into showmanship. To some, this was healing. To others, betrayal. Jagger had postponed a few concerts after Loren's death. But then, as though stepping over an invisible line, the tour resumed. He sang. He danced. He cracked jokes between songs, all while tributes and obituaries still ran across front pages worldwide. Photographs of Loren, smiling static now, frozen in time, appeared beside headlines questioning whether this was mourning or escape. He later insisted, "I was devastated." And perhaps he was. Grief, after all, does not come in one color. It doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it wears sequins and shouts over guitars. But back in New York, Loren's apartment was still sealed, her studio untouched, her last voicemail unretrieved. The world had already begun moving on. Her memorial service was quiet, tasteful, carefully arranged. Friends flew in. Mick gave a reading. His daughters attended. A few fashion insiders sat with folded hands, wearing black. There were no cameras allowed inside the chapel. Outside, however, the flashes resumed. Even in death, she was a silhouette, graceful, elegant, a half-told story behind velvet ropes. Yet the questions refused to settle. Had Jagger tried to leave her? Had there been a final argument? Had she known something the public didn't? Her death, for many, carried the unmistakable scent of abandonment. Some pointed to the timing, her financial collapse, his distance, the rumors of infidelity. Others defended him. He had supported her for years, both emotionally and financially. He had loved her. He hadn't seen it coming. But that was the cruel logic of suicide. It left everyone guilty, whether they were or not. More troubling still was what wasn't said. Her company collapsed days after her death. Staff were let go quietly. Orders canceled. Vendors never paid. There were no statements, no interviews, just a fading presence, an erasure made efficient by grief and disinterest. For someone who had worked so hard to define herself beyond the men in her life, it was almost unbearable that her death had been defined by one. Some friends tried to correct the narrative. She wasn't just his girlfriend, one designer said. She was one of the sharpest minds I knew. She understood structure like an architect. She had taste, real taste. Not fashion, taste. But the world prefers simple stories. Woman in despair. Rock star keeps moving. Tragedy as an afterthought. She had lived her life tailoring the appearances of others, smoothing out the curves, hiding the flaws. In death, no one was left to do the same for her. Her story became a rough cut, unlined. Even now, the image remains. Jagger on stage, under a sky of synthetic stars, singing "Gimme Shelter," as if to conjure something pain, absolution, distance. And somewhere in the folds of that performance, the woman he had lost flickered like a shadow against velvet curtains. She was gone, but not buried. Not really, because grief, like fashion, lives in what's left behind. In echoes, in questions, in silence. After the headlines dimmed and the murmurs faded into fashion's ever-churning cycle, what remained was absence measured not just in rooms left empty, but in the contours of a life that seemed always slightly out of reach. Loren Scott had reinvented herself so thoroughly, so elegantly, that by the time she was gone, few truly remembered who she was before. Luann Bambro, vanished the moment Loren Scott was born. Her friends, those closest to her, spoke in hushed admiration of her transformation. She had rewritten her name, her walk, her voice, even her silhouette. She sculpted herself into the woman she thought she needed to be to survive in a world that rewarded mystique over mess, poise over pain. But it cost her. After her death, the estate was quietly settled. There was no public battle, no scandalous revelations, just a quiet audit of debts and assets. She had no will. Mick Jagger covered the funeral, the apartment was cleared, and the label officially shuttered. It disappeared faster than it had ever been built. In industry circles, some were shocked to learn how deeply in debt she had been. Others, less surprised, had seen it coming. She never let on, a former assistant recalled. She was always solving problems at the last possible second. She believed she could fix it, right up until she didn't, and therein lay the fracture. Loren had always been a woman of solutions. Whether fitting a difficult bodice or negotiating the fragile egos of the red carpet elite, she knew how to patch things quietly, efficiently, invisibly, but the emotional seams holding her together were loosening. And unlike a dress, a person cannot be recut from scratch. In death, some things surfaced. The toxic working hours, the relentless perfectionism, the way she measured herself, not in achievements, but in the approval of those more famous than she. Though she had dressed hundreds of women, she rarely saw herself as one of them. The spotlight always lingered just out of reach. Behind her controlled image was a woman living on a knife's edge between admiration and erasure, between devotion and dependency. And at the heart of it all, the terrible question: what had she truly owned? Not her name, not her image, not even, in the end, her narrative. Some who knew her say she had begun to contemplate escape, not from life, but from the industry, from the city, from a version of herself she no longer recognized. She spoke of leaving fashion, of taking a long trip, of going somewhere where no one knew her. A cabin, perhaps, a beach with no cameras, somewhere to exhale, but she never went. Instead, she folded herself deeper into the performance, smiling for cameras, posing with clients, crafting emails that said, "Soon," and "Nearly there," and "Thank you so much for your patience." Underneath the velvet and polish, a phrase had begun to echo: "I'm not sure this is mine anymore." The life she lived looked exquisite on paper, on camera, in fabric, but it had become a costume. And Loren, the tailor of legends, was trapped inside a gown too tight to breathe. In interviews, when asked what her proudest achievement was, she often said, "Making women feel beautiful." But no one asked if she ever felt that way herself. And now, with her gone, we are left with a hollow space where certainty might have been. An emptiness her dresses can't fill. A silence her legacy cannot explain. She lived in fragments. Her childhood, a secret. Her love, offstage. Her pain, edited. And yet, the trace of her fingers remains in zippers, in stitches, in the elegant curve of a seam. A life not quite hers, but unforgettable all the same. Time moved on, as it always does. The headlines faded. New tragedies replaced old ones. Red carpets rolled on without her. And yet, in the quiet corners of fashion studios and inside the whispered recollections of those who knew her, Loren Scott lingered not as a scandal, not as an accessory to someone else's fame, but as a presence, a kind of shadow stitched into memory. Years after her death, her gowns occasionally reappeared, resold, refitted, reworn. A dress of hers was seen at a vintage boutique in Milan, another at an auction in New York. Some clients kept theirs carefully preserved, wrapped in muslin, hung like artifacts. Few wore them again, because there was something sacred in what she had made, something final. In many ways, her life had always pointed toward vanishing. not in the morbid sense, but in the subtle way she built herself around others, sculpting, refining, flattering, disappearing. She spoke rarely. She listened always. She knew how to direct the eye elsewhere. A magician of silhouette and silence. Her name wasn't on the lips of teenagers buying fast fashion. She wasn't celebrated on Instagram's carousel of curated icons. There was no museum retrospective, no grand rebirth of the Loren Scott brand. And perhaps that's the most honest outcome, because hers was a legacy of quiet beauty, of work that demanded attention but not applause. Some designers die and their name grows louder. Hers became a murmur. Not because she failed, but because the world never quite knew what to do with her. She had crossed too many lines, tall for a model, modest for a celebrity, controlling for a muse, too elegant for the mainstream, too quiet for scandal, too famous to be anonymous, not famous enough to be myth. She existed between names, between cities, between expectations. And between those lines, she created something strange and rare, a space of grace that never asked for permission. To this day, the mystery of her death remains in the folds. No one can say exactly what moment tipped the balance. Was it heartbreak? Was it financial despair? Was it the slow, choking erosion of identity that so many women face when they are no longer seen? There is no tidy answer, only fragments. A note never released. A scarf, once soft, turned final. A wardrobe turned mausoleum. And the strangest part, how it all still feels unfinished. We imagine that the stories of the dead should end clearly, that there should be a final line, a last act, a conclusion. But some lives end like thread, pulled too far, snapped, mid-stitch, without warning, leaving only the question of what was being made. Those who knew her remember the touch of her hands, how she could smooth a dress over someone's back in a single motion, how her fingers danced with pins like a conductor's baton. They remember her laugh, though it was rare. They remember how she walked, not fast, not slow, but with the unbroken rhythm of someone balancing too much in silence. In the end, there is no lesson, no grand moral, only the truth that some lives resist the spotlight, even when they're bathed in it. And that elegance, when worn too long as armor, becomes invisible. Loren Scott didn't vanish. She folded herself into the fabric of other people's beauty and left us staring at the empty frame.